Osamu Tezuka is regarded as the godfather of all manga. The man penned thousands of comics in his lifetime, some of which were huge, massive series that were extremely popular. Stuff like Astro Boy, Blackjack, Kimba the White Lion. These have all been worldwide successes, renowned for decades. He is the guy who made manga what it is. And this is Dororo, the complete story as he penned it. Dororo is kind of an oddball in Tezuka's catalog in that it was clearly meant to be a very long adventure series, but it kind of unceremoniously is truncated. It does have an ending, but it's very clear reading it that the ending was rushed towards. I don't know if it's a case of the manga not having been popular when it first came out, or if Tezuka just didn't feel like doing it anymore, but it does not come to the kind of end you would expect considering the journey up to that point. It feels like this was meant to go on way longer than it did, but nonetheless, what we have here is still a very enjoyable story that kind of leaves you thirsting for more and hoping that, some of the adaptations of the work over the decades will give you that. Obviously, it is quite relevant right now because of the fact that there was just recently a 24-episode adaptation by Studio Mappa. There had already been an anime adaptation from the late 60s directed by Sugii Gisaburo, who also directed the Night on the Galactic Railroad film. It had a PS2 game translated as Blood Will Tell in the early 2000s, all of which retell the same story but with very different aesthetic considerations and transforming it to fit, either their medium or the times that they were released in. The original run was in Shonen Sunday from 1967 to 1968, and if you've read a lot of older comics from shonen magazines, you may realize that they used to be even more violent than they are today, and Dororo is no exception. This is through and through an action-adventure story with crazy Chanbara samurai violence happening on nearly every page. You will see carnage and insanity all throughout. It is a portrayal of the samurai times in Japanese history as a very dark, violent, brutal time where shit was fucked. And of course, there's also the presence of lots of Japanese folklore and supernatural phenomena. The story begins with a samurai lord offering up his son to a pantheon of 48 demons, swearing that he will offer them anything in exchange for the power to rule the country. So each of these demons takes one of his child's body parts, and the child is born with no eyes or nose, no ears, no voice, no arms or legs, no dick. He is born without certain senses that are taken instead of body parts, certain internal organs, basically anything that isn't completely essential to be alive was taken from him. Not that any of this is attempted to be medically realistic at all. Tezuka had a doctorate. He was supposed to be a doctor before he became a manga author. He likes to mess around with the human body in his stories and sort of flex some of his doctoral knowledge, but he also likes to be fantastical and ridiculous. Nothing in this story is realistic in any way, but nonetheless, Hyakimaru, as he's named, is born without any of these parts, and he is sent downriver in a basket. He's found by a monk who raises him and builds prosthetic limbs and, builds him a full body. And, but however, Hyakimaru is constantly haunted by demons. They're always trying to get to him. He's always being pursued. I would say that the Black Swordsman Guts with his curse mark, probably homage to Hyakimaru because it's handled in pretty much the same way. Hyakimaru has to go out on his own. He has to leave his father behind, and he ends up being trained as a swordsman. He has sort of a dark journey. He learns that the world is a fucked up place and that he has no place within it. As he's touring around the world, he comes across this ragamuffin kid named Dororo who is being bullied by people. He's a homeless kid who's a thief. He's constantly getting his ass kicked, but he's always bright and happy. He never lets anything get him down. He's always willing to push through, no matter how painful things get, to try to live and continue on. And Dororo teams up with Hyakimaru at first because of an interest in stealing one of his swords. Hyakimaru has sword arms. His prosthetic arms can be pulled off, and there are really nice swords underneath. He also has a prosthetic leg that when he takes it off can shoot like a gas that kills demons. He's kind of like an Astro Boy of samurai times, you know, with just different weapons built into all of his body parts. This is obviously a motif that Tezuka is a huge fan of. So you got Dororo, who's the scrappy thief kid, Hyakimaru, the badass samurai. They adventure through the countryside, and the book is basically broken up into a bunch of mini arcs. Each place that they show up, there will be, you know, maybe a town that's haunted by some kind of demon. They have to figure out what's going on there, kill the demon. Hyakimaru gets a body part back. It's sort of formulaic, and each arc lasts a couple of chapters. Along the way, though, there are overarching plot threads, such as learning about Dororo's history and the fact that there's this treasure that his father left behind that there's a map to on his back, that's like tattooed on his back. There's the overarching plot of Hyakimaru's father, who is in fact taking over the country, who's slowly, you know, adding more lands to his dominion. He has another son who is Hyakimaru's younger brother. They have to confront each other at a point, so, you know, and of course the overarching story of trying to get all the body parts back. All of that is going on, and it's because there are so many overarching plot threads that the ending ends up being kind of unsatisfying, because none of these plot threads is completely resolved. The ending is, it very much feels like, hey, this got canceled and we had to come up with something real quick. Or maybe that Tezuka wanted to leave it open enough that he could potentially return to it one day if he ever felt like it. Because it doesn't try to tie up all the loose ends. It just is like, hey, this is close enough to an ending, let's move on. But, you know, I'm a firm believer that it's the destination, not the journey, that matters. I mean, if we did see all those things resolved, it would be nice, but we can pretty much predictably assume how the rest of the journey would have gone. So the great strengths of this manga, first of all, that Tezuka's art is brilliant, particularly when he draws big full-page spreads, either of some kind of really crazy action scene or just an amazing background. These incredible tone-setting moments where you just want to stare at the picture for a while. There's images in this I would love framed. I just really love his line work, his particular aesthetic. It's very interesting. I don't think there's a lot of people who have ever, like, successfully imitated him. Like, for as influential as Tezuka was, I can't think of another artist I've seen who, you know, has drawn stuff that quite looks like this. So that's really impressive in and of itself. The story is very fast-paced. There's always stuff going on. Tezuka is an impatient storyteller. He does not like to dwell on any particular emotion for too long. The story is always moving along. There's always new things happening. Even if something really crazy and dramatic happens, he really does not like to dwell on it. He likes to just keep moving. And, of course, his style is always bouncing between different tones. And this is where I unavoidably have to talk about something that I know this is probably a controversial take of mine, and I know people are sick of hearing me always ascribe everything to autism, but Osamu Tezuka's stories, they read kind of like Sonichu. Like, there is this element of, if you've read, like, lolcow fiction on the internet, if you've read a lot of work from, like, autistic authors, you will see a lot of parallels, and a lot of the autistic people I know are huge fans of Tezuka, so I don't feel like this is a baseless thing for me to say. I think that Tezuka's extreme popularity had to do with the fact that he, you know, autistic as he may have been, he's clearly very intelligent. He has a lot of random knowledge that he likes to throw into his books, but there's just this, first of all, the way the characters communicate is extremely unrealistic. None of these characters really talks like real people. They more like describe the events that are happening around them, and everybody's kind of shouty in a way. Imagine like One Piece, I guess, like that kind of style of the way people act, except that whereas One Piece has clearer characterization, like each character clearly has a gimmick and a way that they talk, in Tezuka's work, the characters don't really have such clear-cut personalities. Like, there are elements to their personality, but everybody kind of communicates very similarly in a way that just feels like the way the author would naturally communicate himself. And the fact that he puts in such random miscellaneous details into all of his stories, none of them ever has, like, a consistent tone. It's always all over the place. It's always that they're bouncing between comedy and violence and, you know, extreme situations with not much fixation on emotions, not much time spent, you know, dwelling on the way people actually feel about things, just more a description of events. The way that he breaks the fourth wall all the time, has references to other works in his work, lots of self-references, references to his name, things that you would not understand unless you were following his narrative actively. It's like, I think that the level of self-awareness and the fact that he is clearly intelligent and very talented and very skilled makes it so regular people will enjoy this story regardless. But like, if you compare this to something like Tails Gets Trolled, like, you'll feel similarities there. And I can't avoid talking about it because it's all I think about when I read Tezuka stories. I can constantly feel that sense of just the way that he tells stories just comes off as really autistic to me. But I mean, it's not a knock against it at all. I really enjoy that. Like, I enjoy the fact that he doesn't feel constrained by things like the way a story, like the tone and things like that are meant to be. Like, I'm sure there will be people who will not enjoy this book and they'll see it as just being old school. They'll see it as, you know, oh, this is the way things were back in the day. No, it's just Tezuka. Like, I mean, obviously literature and fiction, even from Japan, had existed long before Tezuka started drawing comics. And you can see that a lot of his influence, a lot of the reason he does things this way is that he is so influenced by cartoons. There's tons of Looney Tunes and, like, Tom and Jerry, like, style humor in here, where he'll have just, like, a break to a comedic moment that is clearly in reference to something like that. Lots of places where, like, the panels get broken. Again, just fourth wall breaks. In the middle of what is otherwise like a traditional Chanbara samurai story, like where constantly people are being mass murdered and like really dark, fucked up things are happening. Most of the side characters that appear will be killed by the end of their chapter. So like, to have that conflation of elements, I think would have been super unique even for the time and even in other manga of the time. It's just not something you see a lot of in stories that aren't created by autistic authors who tend to write that way. And again, I don't mean that as a criticism because I enjoy it. I enjoy the breaking of those conventions because, you know, I'm not as interested in sort of tone pieces as I am in author, like pieces that let me sort of peer into the author's mind and see their interests, see their proclivities and their hang-ups. Like, you really get a strong sense of what Tezuka is interested in and how he views humanity through his work. I mean, the overall theme of this book, I would say, is optimism in the face of the atrocities of the world. And there's a lot of imagery that harkens to, say, you know, the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which Tezuka was alive through, you know. I think he was born in the 20s, so he would have been either a teenager or a young adult when the attacks happened. You know, he has clearly experienced a lot of fucked shit in his life, but has tried to just push through all that by working hard and achieving things. And he constantly produced manga. It was all he did. His dying words were, "I want to work." So, you know, the man, he was always persevering, and he was trying to inspire that in other people, I think. You know, the character Dororo, that's pretty much the foundation of the character, is that no matter how much bad shit happens, Dororo will always get up and keep fighting and always spit in the face of whoever is attacking him. And Hyakimaru just persists on. And there's also a common theme of continuing to do that even when everyone's against you, because these characters are always kicked out. Every time they save a village, every time they save the day, they're immediately driven away for being weird, for being freaks, for being suspicious, just for being different. They're never accepted anywhere they go, and yet they continue to be heroic and be the good guys. And granted, it's not like they're super altruistic. I mean, Hyakimaru murders a lot of motherfucking people over the course of this book, you know, just for sort of being in his way, you know, like they don't even have to necessarily swing their sword first. If they are threatening violence against him, he will murder them without hesitation. Violence is not really portrayed as, you know, it's kind of just portrayed as a fact of life in this story. It's like, this is samurai times. People fucking murdered each other, you know. Death was always a knocking on the door. And yeah, again, you will see some crazy scenes of violence in this story. But there's other themes throughout that are... they're not even so much presented as thematic messages as just ideas that inform the story. Like, for instance, at one point there's a village that's divided in half by this wall, and it's like, for whatever reason, these two halves of the village became at war with each other, and they built up this wall, and they're like being haunted by demonic ghosts and stuff. And the wall, its name is a reference to the wall that was erected between North and South Korea. So there obviously is the motif of the, you know, the North and South Korean conflict being used in this story, which would have been, you know, relatively relevant at the time, since this was written in 1968. But, you know, it doesn't really say anything about it particularly. It's just kind of using that as the motif to drive the story, but ultimately, like, what is causing the problem is demons, and the resolution to the problem is kill the demons. So, you know, there's not like a political commentary going on so much as just the use of different themes and motifs as a way to build a fun adventure story. And there's some chapters where there's really no particular theming. Certain parts just feel like Tezuka felt like drawing this particular thing, so that's what we got. There's one, as we get towards the later part of the book, we get fewer human stories and more just like cool things. Like there's this one guy who's controls two sharks, and the sharks are demon sharks, and it feels like Tezuka wanted to draw a story about fighting demon sharks on the water. It's cool, I appreciate it, but there's nothing more to it than that. There's one part where there's a story about a horse that's like this really badass horse that has a child, and the lord who owns the horse separates the child from the mother, so it becomes a demon and has to be stopped. It's just kind of a sad story about a cool horse. I think Tezuka just wanted to draw a cool horse. And I wouldn't be surprised if part of why Dororo came to an end is that, you know, whether it be the dwindling popularity or Tezuka just canceling the series, that it was kind of going off into the weeds. That, like, you know, the stories were getting more and more esoteric as it goes along, more and more about just like, hey, let's draw a fucking cool turtle. That'll be a fun thing for me to do. And then I don't know if he just lost interest or what, but yeah, I would say the front chapters are definitely more interesting than the later ones, but the later ones are still cool, and by that point you're endeared enough to these characters that you'll pretty much watch them, you know, just go on this adventure. But I would have liked to see it go on long enough to see Dororo grow more as a person into who Hyakimaru hopes for them to become. I would have liked to see, you know, Hyakimaru get all the body parts back and maybe have some evolution or growth on his own part, but unfortunately, it was truncated. Would I recommend this book? Absolutely. It's only $25 for this huge collection, and, I mean, I'm not going to say it's a masterpiece, considering it's unfinished, and that there is not like a strong sense of theming. It's more of a background element in this fun adventure story, but, like, if anything I've described or showed you looks cool, absolutely read this. I enjoyed the hell out of it. I thought it was a great time. I really enjoyed Tezuka's style. I like the weird rambling nature of it. I like how specific it is, how inimitable it is, how like nobody reads like Tezuka because he puts so much of himself into the stories, and he seems like an interesting character with a very, you know, a very worldly perspective being applied to his stories that are just fantastical, insane shit that is completely unrealistic and not bound by any attempt at all to be grounded in anything other than what would be fun to write and draw. If that sounds like your kind of thing, I would say go for it. If you're somebody who really is going to like stop and question each element of the story and be like, do people really act this way, or like that doesn't make sense, or question the fact that like the characters can communicate telepathically just because telepathy is something Tezuka clearly believes in on some level, or just thinks is cool and always puts in his stories. Like, if you can't vibe with the fact that unrealistic shit happens for literally no reason, you might not enjoy this. But I love that kind of shit, so I had a great time with this. Overall, highly recommended. And I'll definitely be checking out even more Tezuka in the future as I continue to see his books crop up. On the next Manga Mondays, at the request of the person who sent it to me, I'm going to be covering Dead Dead Demons Day Destruction. I've got the first 2 volumes. I don't know if I'll just cover 1 or 2. They seem pretty short, so maybe I'll cover 2 volumes. But yeah, this was mailed to me in my P.O. box, and if you want me to read a manga of your choice, sending it to my P.O. box is a great way to help that happen. I have reviewed other ones that came to me before, including Sundome, which is another Inio Asano work that was sent by Wada. I reviewed it in the 8 hours of manga reviews episode. So yeah, I've heard a lot of good things about this, and I'm definitely looking forward to it. P.O. Box will be linked down in the description, but it is P.O. Box 65223, Virginia Beach, Virginia, zip code 23467. I've actually memorized that shit. Also, of course, if you want to buy any of the books that I talk about, I will have a link to them in the Amazon Associates program below. I mean, if you follow that link, anything you buy on Amazon after clicking that link, so you can, you know, not just the page I link to, but anything you buy after clicking it, I get a kickback from that. Doesn't cost you anything extra. I just get part of the proceeds because I linked you there. Pretty cool program. And also, you can support me on Patreon if you want to get all kinds of cool rewards that I have available. That's all the plugs I need this week. See you in the next one.